I've been at the Federal Reserve Bank now for about 5 years in the audit department. Prior to coming to the bank, I've done pretty much internal audit my entire career. Started out back in, godly, it seems so long ago, but 2001 was when I started in May of 2001. And started in public accounting, one of the big five firm. At that time, there were five firms. Now there's only four. So that shows how much it's changed over the last 20 years. But did my time there for a couple of years. Moved on to Kansas City Southern Railroad for a few years, working primarily on Sarbanes-Oxley there. And then from there, I moved on to Protection One. It's an alarm company for a couple of years, and did some operational audits there. And from there, I went to Applebee's and IHOP for about 9 years. So all in audit.
I then commented on how Chris has had a lot of auditing experience in different types of workplaces, and then I asked him if there was any specific reason why he moved around a lot, and this was his response.
Yeah, well, some of it hasn't been by choice. A lot of that in the early 2000s, or right around the 2008 timeframe, there was a lot of mergers, acquisitions, downturns. So, Protection One, and they went through a merger, and again, anytime there's a merger, there's always a downsizing there. So, that's one thing you might experience in your career is just some of those places where you work at. They merge, sales are down, they just start downsizing people, and audit's not a revenue generating department, so it's one of the first ones to get cut. So, and same thing happened at Applebee's and IHOP.
So, you went to college, right?
Yes, I went to the University of Kansas, got my BS in double major in accounting and business administration. And then after my undergrad, I stayed another year and got my master's in accounting and information systems.
How long have you been involved in internal auditing?
I would say, I think right at 20 years, I've been in audit.
So, do you have your CPA?
No, I do not have my CPA. So that's one thing I probably regret the most is, so when I went and got my master's, that was the very first year that they increased the 150-hour rule in order to sit for the CPA. Well, back then, you had to take all four parts at the same time, and you had to pass at least two to get those two out of the way. Well, I would always pass one part, and then I would be short on the second one. And finally, after the third time, I realized that I wasn't destined to be a CPA when I was down in Wichita taking the test, and there was a tornado warning going on. So right at the start of this, I think the second exam, they took everybody out, put us in a safe place, for over an hour. And we couldn't talk, we couldn't do anything. So you're just standing there. And then after the tornado passed, went back, take the exam, and I missed it by one question to condition. Yeah. So I was just like, okay, I'm not a CPA. I'm fine with that. So it's kind of like, okay, that was a path I was going down, and then that didn't happen. So I had to like switch over to something else. So, and that's where auditing was like, okay, well, that's the next closest thing. And I already liked it anyway. So I didn't necessarily need a CPA just for that, but it does help to have it. So, but I am a certified fraud examiner. So I do have one certification. I'm working towards another one. So,
Okay, so what's your favorite part about your job?
I think the learning part of things is just, meeting with people, learning what they do, kind of evaluating things and trying to help them out. Is like, oh, well, here's something in your process. Have you considered this, or have you thought about that? I think that's probably the biggest thing is just understanding everything. And there's a lot of stuff coming at you, and especially at the bank, there's so many things that the bank does that people, the general public doesn't realize that the bank does. So I mean that's it's just kind of fascinating to me. It's just to learn that information and help help them out as best I can, and serve the public.
What's your least favorite part then?
So obviously, the least favorite part of mine is report writing. So when you go through an audit and you've started the planning session and you've done a lot of the test work and you've had findings or observations and recommendations on what they should do, well, then you got to put it down on paper. And that's one of the things I wish I would have known prior to going into auditing. It's like if I would have known how much writing's involved, I probably would have chose something different. Because naturally I don't like writing, but I've gotten used to report writing, which is different than just writing a short story or anything like that, or a term paper. But yeah, report writing's probably the worst thing. It's like you don't want to do it, but you need to do it. And how do you explain something that's really complicated to people and management that maybe don't deal with this area on a regular basis? So trying to bridge that gap and find the right wording. And then I think with that aspect is just taking constructive criticism, when because it goes through a level of review from managers and directors. And when it comes back, it's like, it looks like a term paper. It's all red and there's change this, change that. Well, you kind of get used to that. It's like, okay, I wanted to get my main thoughts down. And then, whether I say this in fewer words or not, that doesn't bother me anymore. But I know early on in my career, it would bother me a lot where like, man, I spent like so much time writing this report and it looks like I should have just never started, because it's everything's changed around and stuff. But now I've gotten used to that where it doesn't bother me as much. But I know for some people it really bothers them, because it's like a term paper. It's like, I think I got an F on this. So
Okay, so clearly you've traveled as an internal auditor.
yes.
Can you like list some places you've been and why you had to go there?
Okay, so I have throughout my career, I have been to 45 of the 50 states for work mainly. And most of those deal with just doing different audits, operational audits, financial reviews. I mean, yeah, I've been everywhere. I was thinking about that when I saw that question. I was like, oh my gosh, I used to travel so much. Like I went when I started in public accounting, I didn't travel the first year. The second year, when I got into the internal audit side, I was like everywhere. I was like in San Francisco for 3 or 4 weeks. I was in Dallas. I was in Denver. I was in Seattle. I was like traveling all over the place. I was in Atlanta. It was fun to visit all those places, and I always try and take in the sights there. So I'm a big baseball fan, so I would definitely hit a baseball game when I could. And as I moved on to like Kansas City Southern, I traveled down mainly in the southeast part of the U.S. So from Louisiana all the way to Atlanta. That was fun to visit down there and just see how things are different compared to where you grow up at. And then at Applebee's, I mean, I was all over the place. I was all over the U.S. Went to Mexico a couple of times. Went to Canada a couple of times, just on work. That's always the best part too, is like traveling and eating different places. That whenever I traveled, I'd never want to hit a chain store, because I could always have that at home. I want to hit local places. There was one trip I had where I woke up early in the morning, flew into Boston, got into Boston, got a rental car, drove all the way up to Maine in one day, and saw all those states and stopped and took in the scenery and everything. And it was just like, wow. And in one day I went through 6 states. That's crazy to think about.
Have you ever come across any fraud or theft?
Yes, not at the bank. I saw that question, but not at the
Yeah.
bank. The bank has a very high standard and control environment. So if we did ever have anything, I'd be really shocked. But when I was at Applebee's, that was kind of one of the reasons I got my certified fraud examiner, is the nature of the beast, the restaurant industry. You got cash there, you got a lot of people coming in and out of a restaurant. I developed a lot of data analytics to identify problem restaurants or problem managers and employees. Yeah, that was a really difficult time when you have to go to HR and be like, yeah, you need to look at this person or look at this restaurant. That's probably the biggest thing I miss about, you know, going from Applebee's to the bank is that, like, so Fridays, this would be my Fridays at Applebee's. Put the headphones on, listen to music, just get a bunch of data and start digging through spreadsheets of information. It's like, oh, I got a pattern going on here. So there were a few times where I did some stakeouts. So I actually went to a few restaurants and kind of tempted them with like paying my ticket in cash just so I could see what they would do, because I had access to the information to their point of sale system. So that happened quite a few times where, like, oh, I went there like 3 times in a week, and every time I went, they, discounted the ticket out and pocketed the cash. So, yeah, it was really interesting seeing, people's behavior. And it's almost too easy to entice them to do stuff like that. But, again, they have other motivations that are driving them.
Okay, and then lastly, do you have any advice you want to give to my class and I?
If I could leave you with 3 things I wish somebody had told me when I was in your position, well, the first thing would be communication. Like, you know, just giving presentations, writing, emails, speaking, is just, you don't realize how much communication you have in a day because, everybody thinks an auditor is just sitting behind a desk and it's like just a nerd there crunching numbers. But no, you have to like go out and talk to people, and deliver messages and reports and everything. Probably the second thing would be just networking, expanding your network, meeting people in other departments, other areas, other industries, just learning, taking in, seeing what they do, how they do things. That's always a big thing. A lot of times when I was at Applebee's, some of the stuff that I was finding, it wasn't just from me finding it, it was from other people from other departments coming saying, hey, something looks funny. Like a person from accounts payable would say, something looks a little funny. Could you look into this guy or, look at their petty cash there? Sure, no problem. Sure enough, they had a hunch. They were right, or somebody in HR was like, we think this area director is doing something, but we're not sure what he's doing. All right, I'll take a look at that. So, and then probably the third thing would be just, kind of investing in yourself, like constantly getting training, getting any kind of certification, doing those things. The bank does a really good job of promoting training. So, I get over, about 80 hours of training a year, but a lot of that I have to go out and, work with the other organizations there's ISACA and the IIA, that have these training sessions.